Disaster aboard the USS Constitution. Chapter 7.
I told Joel to select a team, teleport down to the surface, and check it out. He chose his team and went down to start exploring. He chose a team of seasoned and rookie crewmen to give expert training to those recently assigned to the ship. Tal called.
Captain, Commander Carson is on the comm.
On screen. Joel reported.
Captain, there is no one here. The buildings were well maintained, food in the larder, and yards well groomed. This looked like a town waiting for the people to drop in. I'd like to check out the other cities.
I'll tell you what, number one, I'll send down a shuttle for you to use, he replied.
That would be great, sir.
I sent Lieutenant Steele and Ensign Black down with the shuttle with instructions to become part of the first officer's team. First, the team inspected 2 large towns and a small city, then flew for a while and found a large metropolitan city. In every case, it was like the town and cities were being maintained while everything awaited the people. First, the team inspected 2 large towns and a small city, then flew for a while and found a large metropolitan city. In every case, it was like the town and cities were being maintained while everything awaited the people. Everything seemed to be built for anthropomorphic or human beings. After 8 hours, Joel decided to return to the ship and rest, then use our sensors and telescopes to see what might be happening at night. And break orbit to sweep the entire planet, pole to pole, and its entire circumference. We saw the lights come on as night fell over the area we were orbiting. Using our high-gain telescope, we found that light was the only change, still no inhabitants, with the feeling that the citizenry would take their place momentarily. We did break orbit and check out the entire planet. This phenomenon of expectant waiting for the occupants to return prevailed in every corner of the world. I decided that Joel and I should check one building thoroughly. Was there water, electricity, natural gas, or some equivalent? How deep was the dust? How tall was the grass? So, come daylight, Joel and I, with his team, teleported to the surface. Ensign Black brought the shuttle down. We would check out the town or city hall, businesses, homes, and anything else unfamiliar. Sheila proposed that some of the seasoned crewmen try living in some of the homes for a couple of days and nights just to see what, if anything, goes on. Perhaps we are the inhabitants the planet has been waiting for. So Joel asked Sheila to stay with him for those days, and Barbara asked her boyfriend, Lieutenant Frank Jordan, to stay with her. So, all in all, we had 7 couples staying on the surface for a few days. We slept in the beds, sat in the living rooms, used the bathrooms, and ate the food that our medical lab had scrutinized, saying it was safe and very nutritious. T. Vass and I were the 7th couple. To tell the truth, it was pretty exciting to actually live on a strange planet, eat, play games, make love, sleep, and, well, you know, use the euphemism. The first day went well. The night came, and the street lights came on. But nothing untoward happened. The next day, the 7 couples gathered and discussed our little experiment. The next day, everything was calm until the rain started, and then we were more or less confined to the house. But the following night, we had retired at the usual hour. T. Vass and I had indulged in a little adult recreation and had fallen asleep. At about midnight, we woke, a little confused. We didn't know what had wakened us, but we felt like a little kid convinced about the monster under the bed. I remember, as a boy, thinking that I had to keep my arms and legs under the covers so that the monster couldn't get me. That's how I felt. T. Vass confessed feeling the same way. Stealing our reserve, we got out of bed and began to search in and around the outside of the house. I remembered how I felt when we approached the planet at the galaxy's center. I was in the company of an entity. Later, I found out the name of that entity was Sorge. I found that little Davy, Stella, and I were the only members of our crew who could successfully communicate with Sorge without ill effects. And so, sitting in our living room, I opened my mind to allow some communication, but it had no effect. I asked Commander Trank to teleport down to see whether she could communicate with the entity, but to no effect. Then I asked Petty Officer Winters and Lieutenant Commander T. Sun to teleport down to communicate. Winters and T. Sun were able to communicate with the entity. Thousands of years ago, the population of the planet had evolved to the point of a non-corporeal existence. However, they were affected the same as those who had encountered the death pulse. Although a computer-controlled robot workforce maintained the planet, the hope was that they might one day repopulate the planet. Their bodies were preserved in an underground cryosleep facility cared for by the same computer robot force. I asked, what do they want us to do? Petty Officer Winters reported.
They want to return to their bodies.
I turned to T. Vass and asked, what do you think? Should we try reintegrating them with their frozen bodies or have the robots defrost them and then reintegrate them? Both T. Vass and Winters said simultaneously.
Reintegrate them frozen, and there are millions of them.
Well, okay, let's initiate the life pulse. Abby, T. Sun, Tell them what we will try to do. We initiated the life pulse, and Abby's head nodded.
They have all rejoined their bodies, and the robots have begun the reanimating process.
Then, we all returned to the ship to get some rest. T. Vass and I were glad to see Davy and Ginny, and he was glad that we could return to our family routine. We remained in orbit for a few days, checking the planet often to see whether the population was beginning to stir. On the fourth day, we saw movement on the surface when we checked, so I sent Joel, Sheila, Barbara, Abby, and T-Sun down to check things out. After a few minutes, Joel called.
Captain, the people here would like you to teleport down so they can thank you properly.
Okay, Joel, be right down. When I teleported down, the team I had sent was surrounded by the local inhabitants, a race that somewhat resembled humans but had different proportions, a little different skin color, and very vibrant red hair. All had red hair. Abby Winters introduced me to one striking young man.
Captain, this is the person who communicated with T-Sun and me, Galarich Hassoon.
I noticed that Abby blushed a little as she said his name. Galarich nodded as I stuck out my hand. After a moment, he grabbed my hand, and we smiled as we shook hands. We discussed their plans and found that their plan made thousands of years ago had addressed every contingency we could imagine. Abby told me they called their planet Gargasol and their race Gargasolians. I noticed that Galarich and Abby were very close during my visit. After returning to the ship, Abby asked me,
Captain, may I have your permission to stay here on Gargasol? Just for a little while?
Abby, is there something here that attracts you? She replied,
I would like to get to know Galarich, sir.
You sleep on it. And we will talk tomorrow morning. Okay? She nodded.
Okay.
She left, and I called in my first officer. I told Joel about her request and asked his opinion. He responded,
Captain, a fortnight? We can check out the rest of this solar system. Leave her with a communicator, and she can check in with us once or twice a day.
I smiled at him. Are you a romantic too? He nodded and left the ready room. The following day, Petty Officer Abigail Winters teleported to the surface with her communicator, and we broke orbit to explore the rest of the solar system. She checked in every morning and evening. She sounded happy as she talked with me. We explored the solar system. The planet closest to their sun was a ball of molten iron. The next planet was very much like Venus. There was Gargasol. The next was like Mars, and there were 3 gas giants. This took about 10 days. Every day, Abby would check in and report how things were going. Finally, we established orbit around Gargasol, and I teleported down. Petty Officer Winters met me, and we discussed her situation. Abby, it's been 2 weeks. What have you to report? She replied,
Sir, Galarich wants to go with us when we leave.
I see no reason why not. How do you feel about that? Is there romance in the air? She blushed.
Yes!
Okay, tell him to get his stuff together. We leave in the morning. She jumped up
Yes, sir!
and ran off. When Winters and Galarich teleported aboard, I asked whether I needed to get the purser to assign him a cabin. They said yes, and it so happened that there was an unoccupied cabin near Abby's. I asked T. Vass to examine our new passenger to ensure good health for him and the crew. It was the following day, and it was time for us to shove off. I asked Barbara to point at another nearby star, and she pointed to a red giant. So I told Lieutenant Steele, Barbara, you have the con. Get us to the star you chose.
Aye aye, Captain.
She slid onto the command chair.
Ensign Black, that away, UL-12 if you please.
The bridge crew smiled as Joel and I entered the ready room. I looked at my first officer. Well, how are things going with you and Ensign Black, Joel? He smiled.
Well, we have had 2 dates so far. I did the same things you did, dinner and a movie, Superman, the movie, a little snuggling while we talked. I walked her to her cabin and kissed her goodnight. And on the second date, the same as you. Dinner, Captain America, the first Avenger. When Captain America was diving that German airplane and talking with Agent Carter, I saw tears in Sheila's eyes. I took her in my arms and asked about a third date, and she said yes. I kissed her, walked her to her cabin, and kissed her goodnight. So tonight is the third date.
And what movie are you going to see?
Sir, your formula has worked like a charm, Sleepless in Seattle.
The following day, we were still on our way to the red giant star. I gave Lieutenant Steele the con and talked with Joel. Well, number 1, don't keep me in suspense last night? He smiled.
Just like your third date. She asked to stay and sleep with me, and we made love. I think she's mine, sir.
Later, as I sat in the ready room, the annunciator sounded, and Ensign Black asked to speak with me.
Captain, is it okay that Commander Carson and I become intimate?
Sheila, are you worried? She had tears in her eyes.
I'm in love with him, sir. Is it okay?
As long as you can separate your relationship and duty. I made a sign on her forehead. Bless you, my child. May your relationship with Joel Carson be a long and joyous one. She broke down crying.
Thank you, Captain. Thank you.
As she left the ready room, she smiled and nodded to Joel, and he gave her a thumbs up. I called Joel into the ready room. Joel, I think she is yours. Just remember, relationships are hard work. We can never take the other for granted. Our significant other must be a top priority, except when it comes to your duty to this ship and her crew. He stiffened.
Yes, sir.
Take the con and get us to our target. We arrived at the red giant sun. The planet nearest to the sun was a desert, lacking water anywhere close to the surface. The second planet was Earth-like, with oceans, temperate, oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, land completely covered in tree-like growth, insects, small varmints, and some larger land creatures. There were no signs of energy production, civilization, or bipeds. The third, fourth, and fifth planets were ice worlds. Except for the first planet, there was a vast amount of natural resources that could be used to advantage by any advanced civilization. We recorded our findings and decided to move on. I told Tal to point out a star for our next target. He jumped up and pointed to a white dwarf star. Tal, you have the con. Get us there. He sat in the command chair.
Helm, UL-12, please.
Joel nodded to the ready room.
Sir, this seems a little haphazard. Shouldn't we be more organized?
Number 1, as long as we are precise in recording the systems we visit and continually update our star charts, I see no reason not to have a little fun with it. How often does Tal get to really be part of the action? Our orders are vague: explore this side of the Gavergan wormhole. You know we will only be out here for a few years and then go home. What difference does it make how we choose the systems to explore? He replied,
I guess you're right. And it is interesting to see what our people will choose. And it is fun.
We explored 7 systems in the first year of our mission. Near the end of that first year, Petty Officer Winters and Commander Carson approached me about a wedding. Winters, Galoridge, Carson, and Black stood before the crew and me and vowed to love and honor until death separated them, and the ship celebrated the occasion. I was glad to see the smiles on the faces of our crew as we continued to explore. I had T-Sun point to our next target. She took the command chair and ordered.
UL-12.
Her target was about 10 days' journey, and as usual, we settled into our routine. 3 female crewmen got together often: T. Vass, T-Sun, and Emily Trank. They were all 3 Hepathusian and so had a natural connection. They talked about their Hepathusian families, they talked about their onboard relationships, they talked about many things. T. Vass suggested inviting a couple of young crewmen to join their little group, specifically Petty Officer Winters and Ensign Black. T. Vass felt they needed to have friends outside their significant others and friends they could depend on to be discreet. The other 2 agreed and decided if they thought there might be a need to ask other female crewmen to join their group. This was possibly the most significant decision ever made aboard the Constitution. It provided an innocent means of helping struggling relationships while maintaining peace and harmony among the crew. T. Vass shared with me about their group. She was discreet even with me. I learned no details, it was just that the group sought to help the female crewmen as much as possible, quietly and discreetly, always encouraging, supportive, and helpful. I asked T. Vass, what about the male crewmen? She replied,
You'll just have to handle it the best way you can.
I replied, who among the male crewmen has the training of a ship's counselor or ship's sturgeon? She shrugged.
Not my problem.
I sternly responded, as division chief of your department, it is your problem. This crew's physical and mental health is your problem, Doctor. In my ready room, I commanded the computer, record every meeting of the females' conversation and store them in a file, not to be erased. Allow the parties to believe that these conversations have been erased if commanded, and you will prepare an executive summary for my review. Computer, acknowledge my command.
Acknowledged, Captain.
And do not allow anyone else access to this secret file.
Acknowledged, Captain.
As I walked the corridors of the ship, I noted the faces of the crewmen, male and female. They always reflected quiet peace, even happiness. I read the summary every morning and was satisfied that these ladies were doing a good job helping our crewmen find peace and happiness, the female crewmen, directly and indirectly, the male crewmen. Later, I amended the computer's directive to alert me of anything untoward, otherwise to discontinue the executive summaries and erase conversations over 10 days old. We arrived at T-Sun Star and began our examination of the system. We saw weird figures dancing in the fire as we examined the star. It reminded me of Disney's Fantasia, the last scenes of Night on Bald Mountain. So I ordered that the scene be broadcast ship-wide. Now hear this. This is the captain. What is presented on our monitors is a scene on the current star. Look at the scene. And if anyone has an idea of what we are seeing, please pass your idea to the first officer. That is all, Captain. Out. Later, Joel came into the ready room.
Captain, Petty Officer Winters has asked to speak with us.
Ask her in. As she stepped in, I asked, "What is it, Abby?" She replied,
Sir, those things in the sun, air, star are living creatures. I can sense their thoughts. They seem to be harmless, but there is no way we could ever interact with them due to their composition and temperature. I basically told them hi and that we were too cold to interact with them, and they said, fine. Hello and goodbye. Although they had never realized there were sentient beings outside their realm of existence.
"Well, thank you, Petty Officer. I appreciate you coming. Do you remember the scared young crewman who was reluctant to use her new powers but decided to try for the good of her ship and crew?" She nodded rather enthusiastically.
Yes, sir, thanks to you.
She left the ready room, and Joel remarked,
That's quite a remarkable young woman.
I said, "Joel, we need a promotion ceremony in the very near future. Winters, T-Sun, Tal, Steele, Black, Hank, and many others have been promoted," he said.
Let's do it right now. We call them in one or two at a time and surprise them.
Great idea. We'll tell them not to give away the surprise. Now hear this. This is the captain, Commander Peterson, and Lieutenant Jensen. Report to the captain immediately. When they reported, Joel locked their heels and chewed a little, and then I stood and said, "Hank, you have been promoted to full commander, and Tal, you to lieutenant commander. Thank you both for your expertise and loyalty. Now, when you leave, try to look somber, and don't let anybody know about this. We have a bunch of promotions to celebrate." Next was Petty Officer Winters and Lieutenant Commander T-Sun, and much the same happened to them. When we called Ensign Black, I nodded to Joel. She was called alone. I stepped out onto the bridge while Joel and Sheila celebrated her promotion. Our little game took several hours. I asked for ship-wide at the end. Now hear this. Commander Joel Carson has been promoted to captain and will be transferred to the USS Hood, the newest Bradley-class dreadnought. Commander Hank Peterson will be transferred to be Captain Carson's first officer. Commander T-Sun, report to the bridge immediately, please.